Welcome to all who've just signed in, and welcome to this, our second demystifying session of this financial year. So we did one about a month ago on solar, and similarly we'll be looking to upload that recording so you can listen back and watch back to that session. In terms of just some basics, if you want to adjust your name on your profile, just so that we can see who you are. If you've got any kind of internal IT quirks that maybe uses your username or anything like that, please, if you could just adjust your name to include your company details as well, that would be really helpful. But that can be done with the three dots at the top right hand side of your screen, your picture on the profile. If you can, if it's okay to keep yourselves on mute during the presentations, we will be doing some Q&A at the end of this. But if during the process, if you have any issues or any questions, please do use the chat function, where we will be trying to answer those questions as we go along. We have a few more minutes of, there are still people arriving in the waiting room and joining us, so just leave a minute longer for that. But whilst we're doing so, I just wanted to thank our four panelists who are joining us today, and we'll do some intros in a short while, and they'll hopefully help you understand better their own journey when looking at Scope 3 emissions in their supply chain, how they've tackled it themselves, why they got started, things like that. So we'll be running through a session where we will be asking lots of questions and hopefully getting some insight from our four panelists, and then hopefully I'll give you a chance towards the end of the session to have some discussions amongst yourselves about your own approach to supply chain and Scope 3 emissions, if indeed you've started, and all of the complications that go with that. So as mentioned, for those that have maybe recently joined, if you can, on the top three dots, top right-hand corner of your own profile picture, if you can adjust your name as it appears at the bottom of your screen to include your name and your company name, that'd be very helpful for us. This is the second in our demystifying series for this financial year. We've got a third one coming up. I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end as well, a reminder, but that's on green finance, so financing your renewable projects, your energy efficiency projects, your anything to do with your environmental improvements on your site. Finance, we know, is a big issue, so we are hoping to run that probably in about a month's time. More details to follow on with that. But I think the first thing we'll do, a very brief intro to what we're going to be discussing. This is a light dive, not in any ways a deep dive into Scope 3 emissions and your supply chain impacts, but really trying to give you some of those hints, tips, ideas, experience of people who have started on this journey. So we'll do some intros in a little bit. But what I'd like to do first off, if Scott, if you could bring the poll up, we're going to do just a brief poll. So if you could all answer the poll that should be appearing on your screen shortly, and this is around how you feel in terms of confidence in your supply chain reporting. Can everybody see a poll? Can somebody else see a poll yet? Just checking, see if that's working.
Can't see a poll yet.
Okay, we will probably leave that one until it does. If it appears halfway through, we will tackle that as it pops up. But if I can just then maybe start with introductions. The poll may appear as partway through, so apologies for that. But we'll just do some introductions. So myself, my name's Alistair Job. I am the technical lead at Green Economy. So a background, way back when, in regulatory work with the Environment Agency. I'm a chartered waste manager. but mainly more recently, I've been doing a lot more work on energy efficiency advice for businesses, everything from industrial decarbonisation, food and drink, loads of different sectors, loads of different sizes, but a lot of it has been support within Greater Manchester for the last 12 years, supporting SMEs. So that's me, but over to, I'll start, I'm just checking my order. John, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Alistair, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll briefly introduce the organisation I'm part of and my space in the business, and perhaps why I'm here to sort of support Alistair in the green economy today. I don't think I can properly introduce Howth without first talking about why, our purpose as a business. We're very much a business that's driven by our values and our purpose, which is to help save lives and improve lives. And we achieve that purpose through our products and services that we provide to customers in the pharmaceutical and the healthcare sectors, and through the activities that support and develop our team and the community that we work in. We're based in Bolton, tracing our roots back to 1858. But our more recent history, we pioneered the development of something called ultra clean ventilation, which is used in operating theatres across the NHS and in private healthcare settings, both here in the UK and overseas. The other major area of our business is design and manufacture of bespoke capital equipment for pharmaceutical manufacturers, who produce all manner of drugs, including some of the very latest cancer treatments going into the market. So we're an engineering company with a purpose to make some huge change to the lives of the people that we impact through our activity. Just to give you, I suppose, an idea of the scale of the business, it should probably be useful for the context of the session today. We're an SME, so I guess like many of you on the call, finding navigating the whole sustainability space a challenge. As a business, we employ around 140 people, so we're a growing SME, operating across these three business units with a turnover of around 25 million. Personally, I've been with the business for just over 4 years, and in my current role as Supply Chain and Operational Excellence Director, my responsibilities have included leading our sustainability activity for the last 2.5 years. And it's been a steep 2.5-year learning curve, plenty of mistakes and lessons learned. So looking forward to sharing a bit more today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Evelina, can I come to you next? Just a similar overview of yourself, company, and your role. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Evelina Niziołek-Wilson, and I'm Head of People and Improvement at Castlefield, the thoughtful investor. In terms of what Castlefield does, we've been helping people grow their money in line with the personal values for over 20 years. So we take time to understand what matters to our clients and build an approach that's clear, personal, and aligned with goals and values of our clients. And this is why we know the thoughtful investor. And it comes back to the fact that we believe that anyone can grow money without compromising on values that matter to them. We bring values to our shopping habits. Loads of us, it's something like 80% of us uses values when we shop. So we at Castlefield think you don't have to drop those values when it comes to investing in your pension and looking after your financial future. So thoughtful investing is not just what we do, it's who we are. Similar to John, the purpose is at the center, at the core of everything that we do. We're also unique in our ownership structure because we are employee-owned business. So around 75% of Castlefield is owned by 100% of current and former co-owners, with the remaining 25 owned by the charitable grant-making foundation. In terms of the size, we're slightly smaller, John. We are SME, we're small SME. We've got just under 50 people with a turnover of 4 million.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you very much, Evelina. And then moving on to Claire, if you'd like to do the same, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Fallon. I am the Group Sustainability Manager at The Growth Company. The Growth Company is the parent company to Business Growth Hub and Green Economy. So I've been in post, I think, 4 years now. Previous to that, I spent 5 years working with Alistair, supporting businesses. So a bit about the growth company. We currently have roughly about 54 sites across Great Britain, so Scotland all the way down to London. We have about 1,700 members of staff. And our activities really range from supporting SMEs, which is what Business Growth Hub does, but then we also have our employment side, which supports those who have difficulties getting into employment. So it tends to be those that have just come out of prison, maybe they have long-term health conditions, things like that. And then we also have our skills side, which is supporting those that have just left full-time education, apprenticeships, adult education, things like that. So a wide range of activities, wide range in terms of different sites, and also a very diverse supply chain as well because of that.
Great. Thank you very much, Claire. And finally, Jamie, if you could just introduce yourself and the business. Thank you.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Richardson. I'm the Sustainability Director at TSK Group, where we are an SME based in Salford, just a stone's throw from Media City, and been in operation for 30 years now. As I say, I'm the Sustainability Director. I've been in role for 2 years. It was a brand new role to the business as well. So some focus areas have been developing the sustainability strategy and net zero route map for the business, as well as process improvement and implementation, and developing a sustainability conscious culture within the business as well. In terms of what we do, we're a workplace strategy, design and build organisation for brands around the UK. So that involves sitting down with organisations, understanding their workplace aspirations, whether that's getting people back into the office after COVID, expanding or reducing their office portfolio, aligning to their net zero goals as well. And then we'll actually design and build that workspace for them as well. So retrofit is a big part of what we do for commercial offices. And from my point of view, it's how do we do that in the most sustainable way possible and helping clients achieve their net zero goals as well. We have 100 employees approximately in the turnover of about 68 million.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and your companies. Just a brief bit about it. I think we've had quite a few more people join recently. Just one thing is, if you do want to change the view, top right hand corner, you can specify multi-speaker, so you can see the different speakers that are talking, or speaker view or gallery view. That might help some people if you're struggling with the view at all. And as I mentioned before, please do put any questions, queries, comments, observations in the chat. We'll be looking at that as we go along and trying to answer some of those as we can. So starting the more detailed questions around Scope 3 emissions and supply chain emissions, I'd just like to come to you first, John, and ask really, what are your drivers for starting this process? What initially brought you to looking at Scope 3 and supply chain in general? What are the drivers, what are the pushes or the pulls, if you like?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of main factors that have driven us to do this. I suppose firstly, it's a natural next step in our development, where we're at our understanding of the business's carbon footprint, and we'd made some commitments as well through the Science Based Target Initiative to measure and reduce Scope 3. So I guess like most, we started with Scope 1 and 2, developing our understanding there, learning more about the areas that we had a direct control of as a start point, and like I say, then this sort of natural progression into Scope 3. I guess though, it wasn't just that we had that control of Scope 1 and 2, but it's the ability to measure it more accurately. What those emissions were that makes that suppose I hesitate to use the word easy, but I think we could grasp and tackle the scope 1 and 2 elements, where scope 3, if I'm honest, it felt like a problem for another day when we started out, but that other day came around fairly quickly, which I suppose is the other driver comes in with, which is our customers. Within the sector that we support, or the two main sectors that we support, we've got healthcare and pharmaceutical manufacturers. There's a huge drive by those customers to take action on their own scope 3, which is us, and our emissions. And as a tier 1 supplier, we've got some very clear directives coming down as to what those requirements look like, and also the fallout if we don't adhere to those requirements, if we don't provide the information, if we don't carry out the sort of the tasks that are involved to understand our own scope 3. And from a supply chain point of view, in all cases, when be it the NHS or another company that's a customer, the requirements have always included us needing to measure and understand the emissions from the purchased goods and services, one of the categories of scope 3, obviously, and the transport and distribution, another obviously supply chain aspect of that. And I guess the other piece is that, or the other point is that scope 3 is the biggest piece of the pie, even where we're at today, which we're by no means done, but we're in a position where we started to measure some scope 3, but not all of it, and even now that portion of our carbon footprint which is coming from scope 3 is more than 50%. I'd expect that to rise to somewhere in the region of 75-80%, maybe, once we've got a mechanism to capture all the scope 3 data that we want to look at. So, if we're going to make a difference, then we're going to have to firstly baseline it, get more measurement, more data in place, and before we can really start to look at ways to reduce it and make a difference there.
Very good, thank you very much. Yeah, that's really clear imperatives is there. One of those, just for the purposes of people on the call who maybe aren't as conversant with the terminology, Jamie, would you just very briefly describe what it is we mean by when we're talking about scope 3 emissions? I think John alluded to it a little bit there, but what does it actually mean in broad senses?
Yeah, of course. So there's 3 broad categories that carbon emissions sit within: scope 1, 2, and 3. It's probably worth I just briefly mention scope 1 and 2, just so we know where scope 3 fits in. So scope 1 is ultimately what you directly control and that your sites and operations are directly emitting. So in an office setting, for example, that would be, if you've got gas-fired central heating, that'll be the boiler that you've got in the plant room. If you've got vehicles owned or operated by your company, then that'll be the emissions coming from them. Manufacturing, again, if you're using fossil fuels to generate energy on site, then that sits in scope 1. Scope 2, unless you've got you're generating power and you've got a power station on site, which is probably not many of us, then you are procuring your electricity through a provider via a power station, and that sits in scope 2. So it's indirect, but it is something that you can control in terms of the electricity tariff that you are on. Scope 3 is basically everything else, and that is why it makes up such a big proportion of people's carbon footprints. It can occur both upstream and downstream in your value chain of what you offer as a business, and that's where the supply chain related emissions generally are significant and make up the largest proportion of a company's total footprint. So the upstream activities, so that's before the product kind of reaches the company, are your purchased goods and services, so all the materials that you are procuring from suppliers. So for us in an office space, that'll be all the furniture, all the fixtures and fittings, all the everything like that, and that's the embodied carbon within those materials. Transport and distribution, so how those materials are actually getting to your projects or to your office or wherever, and then waste generated in operations as well. So I'm just touching on the ones that are supply chain related in scope 3. And then there's downstream activities, which are how you're transporting and distributing the products that you give to your customers, and the end of life treatment, which might sound, well, I don't dispose of it, but you do need to be thinking about how the products that your customers using are disposed of, particularly if you do things like take back schemes or things like that.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really useful. I mean, some on the call will know and have maybe started their journey on carbon accounting, understanding where their footprint is, but it's very good to give that indication. Fantastic. And just whilst you're thinking about it, do you have any sort of clear drivers, any pushes or pulls from your organisation that you've seen, and have those, what are they, and have those grown over the last few years for you as an organisation, Jamie?
Yeah, well, it's certainly something that has risen within our company's own agenda, and I guess that's why they recruited me in the last couple of years as well, into a senior role in the business, acknowledging that it's something we need to be doing corporately, but also it's things that clients are asking for within their own workspace projects as well. So we need to be able to deliver a sustainable outcome as part of the work we're doing for clients. And I think there's the acknowledgement that if we stand still and do nothing in this space, then there is a chance that it's going to hit our bottom line, because we won't actually be able to do business with certain clients. But also, I think, there's an acknowledgement that we need to do something. And I think if we didn't, then even our own employees internally would be questioning whether they actually want to work for TSK, if it's not seen as a business that's taking the environment and society seriously. So I think there's kind of those drivers internally, but also externally as well.
Fantastic. Evelina, do you have any others that either resonate, or any additional points in terms of your drivers for your organisation?
So it all resonates with us, but again, coming back to the purpose, for us, it's all about the purpose and mission. We exist, we offer values-based investment, but from the perspective of being values-based ourselves. So we would be lying to our client, investing their money in environmentally friendly funds when we don't do anything ourselves. So it was absolutely no-brainer when the board has approved our net zero our net zero journey. I think we're in year 4 now. So, it all starts with the little things, doesn't it? It starts with the fair trade coffee we buy in. It starts on the furniture we sit in. It goes through initiatives we want or we don't want to be part in. So as Castlefield wants to be net zero by 2030, with our funds being net zero by 2040. So it's a journey we're on, but as I said, and similarly to what Jamie and John said, scope 1 and 2, quite easy to manage in a sense that we can control it, but it is that supply chain that it's posing a risk. But pull the sleeves up, we're up for it. That's
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. And then finally, Claire, were there any other sort of interesting areas where I don't know whether it was clients or stakeholders that were asking the question, or was it more, did you feel it's more internally driven? And what are the other potential benefits?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of both of those. So obviously, it's a core value for the growth companies. It's in our values around us being sustainable, having a positive impact on the environment. Also for us as well, because we are a large organisation, we have a lot of legal and contractual reporting requirements around environment and social value. So again, that is a massive driver for us. So we have SECR, we have ESOS, we have PPNs that come out from the government, which require us to report.
On those, Claire, do you mind just doing a couple of acronym?
Yeah,
explain
sorry,
very brief.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
because again, some on the call know exactly what you're talking about, but and I might do, but sorry.
Yeah. So SECR is, and you're testing me now. So streamline energy and carbon reporting. So that is energy and fuel reporting, and we have to do that annually. ESOS is we have to do every 4 years opportunities for reducing energy and fuel use, and then report on those, our progress against those annually. And then PPN, it used to be 0621, but I think it's now PPN 006. And that is a requirement that if you have funding from government, which is over a certain threshold, we have to report on our full carbon footprint, basically. And we have to do that annually, and it has to be on our website. So that does include our scope 3. For us, our scope 3 is 94% of our carbon footprint. Purchase goods and services is 72% of our carbon footprint. So it's a massive area for us, and I've done quite a lot of work on that, just getting to a point of actually understanding it. But I'll cover that off in a bit.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So some multiple reasons for all 4 of you to have to take this on as part of your day job, whether it's internal drivers. So somebody says we should just be doing this anyway because it's the right thing to do. It's the people that come to work for your organization and want to stay there. They're expecting you to do the right thing. It's external clients asking, how are you getting on with this and where are you at, just from a general stakeholder position. It's customers and clients requiring this, or it's government requirements to say you have to. And I suppose there's potential others that have been covered in as well around the cost saving benefits. Whilst a lot of people assume that carbon reporting and reduction has a cost associated with it, the vast majority of cases that if you're reducing your carbon impact, you're also probably going to be saving money. So that's really interesting. So we've got an overview of all 4 of your organisations, about who you are, what you do within those, and then those drivers and sort of business imperatives as to why it's important to start. Which leads me to my next question for John. If you could just explain for those who haven't really got to the point of starting out, what are those first steps that you took?
So a challenge was this. We came at it from a standing start. Personally, taking this up as many SMEs, something else that gets bolted onto the day job, and I was struggling to get my head around it. So we did bring in some support. We certainly needed that, because I think, probably similar for many businesses, but where we sit as a tier 1 supplier into these big organizations, a lot of our supply chain are well advanced in comparison to where we are. Other suppliers will be micro businesses, and the level of knowledge and understanding within them is minimal. So everyone's kind of in this struggle to try and understand things, and we needed some help to get started. We didn't know really how we could do that in a quick way, and that's where we suppose the advice that came through was looking at this from a spend-based approach. So that's how we started, looking at what emissions factors and data aligned to what we were spending. So I guess it's got its pros and cons as this. To be fair, on the positive side, it allows you to produce a baseline, certainly for that purchase goods and services, which is where we started, without having to go into the supply chain and request data. So we worked internally. We worked with the purchasing team, we worked with the finance team to collect data such as annual spend per supplier, that supplier's location geographically, the supplier's sort of industry classification. With that data, there are some emission factors, conversion rates that you can use. to take that spend and convert it into a CO2 equivalent. So we did that, which has got us a baseline. That's great. It was relatively quick to get that information. As I say, it was all internally focused. There are drawbacks, of course, the accuracy or the lack of, I suppose, accuracy with that. We can't be sure how reflective the spend data of a particular supplier is in terms of how emissions intensive those particular products are that we purchase. So it's a very broad brushstroke. I suppose another drawback is that as we grow, we're a business on a growth trajectory. We're going to need to purchase more goods, services, and that'll just directly impact the emissions if we continue to use the spend-based approach. Irrespective of anything that we might be doing with the supply chain to reduce those emissions or to do ourselves. So it's not ideal. It's probably not what we'll have in the long term, but it's certainly a start point. It gets you to a stage, got us to a stage where we can provide a level of information back to our customers that they're looking for, and allows us to look at the suppliers from an emissions point of view, a number associated to the emissions, rather than just looking at it from a spend perspective, so that we can focus in on the right areas, the right suppliers as we move forward and refine things from here.
Can I just add to that as well, John?
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
And Alistair, yeah. So we did the same. So our first year, I think we did spend based on the top 20 suppliers we spent the most money with, and just applied an industry emissions factor depending on which industry the suppliers worked within. Similar to what John said, the problem is with that the only way you can reduce your emissions in that area is by reducing your spend, which again, realistically, we were probably going to end up spending more, whether that's inflation, increased work, or actually, even if you're using more sustainable products, that could actually be more expensive. So you're doing the right thing, but it's increasing your emissions. So in year 2, we dug a bit more into that to say, well, what are we actually buying from these suppliers? So for us, it might be something like carpet tiles, it might be partition walls, particularly some of the things that we're buying an awful lot of, and applying an average carbon factor for that material. So again, it's still quite high level, but you're then refining it to the quantities that you're buying rather than how much you're spending on it. And therefore your incentive to reduce your emission is by reducing the quantity. So for us, that would be, well, can we reuse? Can we design things in a way that it's using less partitions by having more open plan space and things like that? And you can start to do a bit of a carbon hotspot analysis on where are your biggest impact items that you're buying.
That's quite interesting, Jamie, because I think we tried to do that, but because we don't buy the products, we buy services, and our main kind of a supplier is FCA regulator, so we kind of stuck with measuring it per spend. You can't, so yeah, for that. But it is fascinating. We actually used help from Green Economy team to help us to get a head round on, how do you approach it? Have you got any tools? Because we were starting with just empty Excel spreadsheet, and so that was quite helpful to get us through the first year, and then we took that in house. But we are doing it purely based on spend as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the inflationary one's a bit of a problem. I think if you do use spend-based approach, and the government conversion factors with the SIC codes associated with your purchase obviously give you that figure.
Yeah.
Some of them aren't very up to date, so you have to imply, as we know, big inflationary numbers over the last 3 or 4 years. So it has its own issues. And as mentioned previously, whilst I'd love to think that everything we do when we're reducing our carbon impacts saves us money, sometimes the most sustainable option is not always cheaper. So you could be spending more on something and it increases your it reduces your carbon footprint. Sorry, but it's actually a more expensive option. Not always the case, some renewable and reusable materials, but sometimes the green option isn't always the cheapest. And especially if the client is keen to do that, see the added value.
And then on another side as well, I find that the way we measure it by spend, it doesn't take into consideration of the good sustainable choices we've made. So, the furniture the cleaners we use them because they're getting paid your living wage. It costs us more, but we don't get extra points for that. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've actually used our supply chain emissions calculations as a selling point for clients as well. So where we've got our quantity surveyors to, when they're doing basically a cost analysis to present to clients, we're then applying the carbon factors to the line items and saying, here's your, as well as a cost estimate, here's your carbon estimate. So basically, we just apply the carbon factors to the list of quantities of materials. So when you're saying you normally have a conversation with the client around, well, where can we value engineer the costs? We can also say, well, actually, the bulk of your carbon sat here with these quantities. What could we do with your help to change the designs to reduce the carbon associated with it as well? So we've turned it into a selling point and a conversation around carbon with clients who we're ultimately buying these products for.
Excellent. Yeah, really good. Evelina, we've been talking about the sort of why to get started and what it is and how. In terms of who might be involved, have you sort of started to work with your colleagues about this, and do you have any initiatives, programs, anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to sound a bit cliche to say you have to absolutely have a leadership buy-in. Okay, so absolutely no brainer in there. The way Castlefield is structured, because of our employee ownership, the subcommittee of the main board is called Employee Ownership Committee. So the board has kind of asked and tasked the Employee Ownership Committee with the net zero journey, but it's all volunteers. Okay, it's all volunteers. It's all my green champions and enthusiasts from across the team, and there are people at all different levels in organizations. I have got somebody. There's only 5 of us. But I've got a management accountant who's obviously great with numbers, got really close to supply chain. She's got all that. We've got a investment analyst who is doing the engagement with our suppliers and sending the questionnaires and emails, etc., gathers that data. He's got an experience of doing that with the companies we invest in as well. So we're tapping into that, but it's all done on the top of our day job. So it has to be, but it is important that people who, people are wanted to get into the green team are people who believe in it and who are enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, that's always a really good place to start, is pushing an open door when you've got people who are committed. Not sort of change it to the negatives too much, but Claire, what did you find are the main difficulties when starting to look into your supply chain? What were those immediate problems that raised their head?
So our supply chain is large and complex, I would say. So just to put it in perspective, so in 23-24, we spent 36 million just on buying things, and we had 1,455 suppliers. When delving into it, with our procurement team, it seemed to be that our supply chain was broken down into 2 distinct areas. So we had your traditional supply chain where we buy things, and then we have a supply chain which we call supply chain partners, and they are where we have subcontracted work. So our procurement covers both sides of those, but there's these 2 sort of distinct areas. What we and that took quite a long time to actually get our heads around. Like, that's how we looked at, like, when we would do a breakdown of what we'd procured, it'd be like, why have we got all these random services and everything going on? So getting an understanding of that. What also we found is that there was different ways of onboarding our suppliers depending on what side of that supply chain they fell under. So actually the ability to gather data and all that sort of stuff became quite difficult depending on how suppliers were onboarded. So it may be that we've gone down an EOI route, so expression of interest route for our supply chain partners. But for when we've purchased sort of traditional goods and services, it's been through a tender process. So there's lots of different sort of nuances to our supply chain that it was really difficult for us to get our heads around, and we spent quite a lot of time just mapping everything out, trying to get right, what does our supply chain actually look like? Some of the other difficulties we had is that traditionally the way that our company has grown is that sites have taken on responsibility for contracts themselves. So we had very little centralized contracts, especially around those areas where we were reported. So things like waste, each site seemed to set up their own waste contract. So actually there was no standardization around what were we getting supplied as part of a contract, where was data sitting, all that sort of stuff. So I think I've probably spent the last 2 years just trying to nail down what our supply chain look like, how do we engage with it already, what data sits there, where are the gaps. That's been a massive challenge for us before we even, on top of that, having to report but just doing it at a spend based level, knowing that it was wildly inaccurate, but we just had to start from somewhere while we got our heads around everything else. So one of those difficulties has definitely been being able to take a step back and realise you're not going to click your fingers and you have the right information straight away. It's taken us quite a few years to build on experience and understand what our supply chain looks like before we can even start kind of looking at decreasing its impacts.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, it's not necessarily trying to give a negative view of the whole process, but it's more realistic to be aware of it up front, that it is, the spend-based approach.
And not to think that every other business has got it nailed straight away. I can guarantee you we have not got it nailed. And if it's going to, and just for you to understand that, if you go in and realise that your supply chain, you've got no understanding of your supply chain whatsoever, everyone else is in the same boat as you. That's why I'm trying to give this information. I'm not being negative about the process. It's just we're all in the same boat.
Yeah. It is a data exercise, data quality, etc. John, just coming to you for a moment. We've talked about some of the sort of scale and scope of the task from Claire and how we might sort of start the process with that spend base. What practical steps have you taken when discussing this with your suppliers, and how have you approached that?
So I mentioned before when I talked about the approach we've taken with that spend approach being a positive, that we didn't need to engage with the supply chain. I guess that's double-edged, isn't it? Because we weren't having those conversations, or we weren't looking at how we can get help from our suppliers, or how we can help those that are looking to develop in that space. So what we decided to do and sort of initiate at this stage, it is a light touch approach to talking and engaging with the suppliers on a face-to-face basis about our requirements, and about the requirements that our customers are putting on us, and how we're going to engage with them around sustainability as we move forward. We've done that through a couple of sort of natural touch points that already exist in the way that we work. One of those being through our quality audits. So we've an established mechanism where we're visiting suppliers, maybe 3 or 4 key suppliers in a year, as part of the quality management system. And so sustainability and a discussion around that, and understanding of where the suppliers are on their journey is firmly part of that process now, Alistair. So we talk to the supplier and like I say, gauge that level of of knowledge, that level of understanding, if sustainability is even on their agenda. And we'll talk to them about starting points. We'll you know, if they're a local supplier in Greater Manchester, we'll recommend yourselves that they reach out for some support in a way that we did, or if they're in different regions, seek that support. Get the ball rolling is what we're saying to them at this point, because it's only going to intensify for all of us, and we'll start to outline what we're planning in the future and what we'll be looking to build on what we've been doing in the background with our supply chain, and how we're going to have to refine that data as other people have touched on, and get more accuracy. We're going to need to be having those conversations and getting data out of them. So yeah, that's been the sort of the start of the 10 with the suppliers themselves.
Yeah, it's giving these organisations prior and fair warning that this is coming up, and I think that's the key. Yeah. Jamie, how are you looking to engage with and discuss and talk with your suppliers, and what sort of what metrics might you use in terms of that approach? What tools you use?
Yeah, well, I think the earliest opportunity you get with your suppliers as part of the onboarding process, to be one of your suppliers in the first place is key, because it's your opportunity to set out your stall in terms of what you stand for as a business, and therefore where your supply chain needs to align with what your aspirations are. So for us, we've incorporated a sustainability section within our pre-qualification questionnaire for suppliers, but we've made sure that it's not too onerous, acknowledging that some of our suppliers are, you know, a handful of people in a business, and you know, wouldn't have a dedicated sustainability role, and maybe a little bit further behind on their carbon journey. So we're asking things like, have you set net zero targets? Do you have an environmental policy? Do you collect data on your carbon reduction? Just to make sure that that is something that they're aware of and are considering, rather than going into great depth at that stage around what they need to do to help you. We've done some kind of softer communications as well, where we've done some lunch and learns specifically for the supply chain, which has been useful, because they can ask you specific questions or realize that it's a common challenge across the supply chain. It's not just them, and then we try and provide support with helping them on their journey. And I've even sat down with some of the ops managers in some of these organizations to say, oh, here's, you know, what do you do, and therefore is there some low-hanging fruit that we can get you doing, even if it's just something like, you know, reducing paper consumption in the office or something. It just gets people starting to do something in that area. I think one just, it's kind of along this line, but it's just thinking about, before, I think what I wouldn't advise to do is going out to your supply chain and just saying, give me every bit of information you've got, regardless of whether it's going to be useful to me or not, because it's not necessarily helpful for anyone in that scenario. My advice would be to look at, you know, where is the carbon sat within your scope 3 categories? You know, what are your biggest impacts, and therefore you can make the biggest gains in carbon reduction. Because if you're, you know, pestering your supply chain for something that's a tiny proportion of your emissions, you're creating a lot of work and potential confusion there for a small proportion of your total emissions. Whereas if you're tackling some of your bigger ticket items, you know, that's where you're going to make your biggest carbon reduction gains. So yeah, just looking at overall across what you're procuring from your supply chain and how that's distributed with vehicles and things, just looking at where the most intensive bits are and bite at those first.
Yeah, that sounds ideal. So yeah. I think that leads nicely onto something that Claire and I have discussed at length in the past. So I think, Jamie, you've mentioned tackling your top 20 by spend. But Claire, building on that, what other kind of metrics might you use, and what sort of tool do you use to select who to tackle first? How do you know where to start?
Yeah, so I developed a risk matrix to identify our environmental strategic suppliers. So those of you that are have been on Journey to Net Zero and done the risk matrix module will recognise this, because that's what I use. So basically, I have a number of categories that I score the whole supply chain on. So it was based on the amount of spend with the supplier, whether they were supplying a product, a service, or whether they were a supply chain partner, whether there was an inherent environmental risk, the size of the business, so whether they were a micro, an SME, like that sort of thing, and our ability to influence. So that was me doing some research on Companies House to look at what their turnover was, had a look at what our spend was with them, and then kind of doing a quick formula to work out, actually, do we represent a big proportion of their turnover, so we might have an ability to influence. And each one of those categories I scored between 1 and 5. I didn't do it based on location, other than, well, the main reason is because we have, all these sites across Great Britain, and because we don't have any in Northern Ireland. And actually, what does local mean to us? I just took that category out. And then from that, anyone that had a total score over 15, so the highest score was 25 that they could get. Anyone over 15 was identified as being an environmentally strategic supplier. So that worked out to be, of those 1,455 suppliers, 96 were identified as being within that category, and they represented 7% of our suppliers. It worked out to be about 60 million spend with those 96 suppliers, so about 44% of our total spend. So that's a good chunk of of spend that was identified as being our environmental strategic suppliers. Last year, so obviously I do everything on a year. I'm behind everything on a year because I have to wait till the financial year before I can go back to the report. But I did it last year based on the year before, so that was 23-24. That was a pilot of kind of how to do it. I'll do it again this year for the previous year. I've not got to that point yet. So just to kind of compare, see whether the same sort of things are happening, same sort of suppliers are popping up. Moving into this year has been the second year of us doing it. I want to sort of tweak things slightly. So I'm adding in a column for social value scoring, so social value risk scoring. So I can potentially add in some additional engagement with those suppliers if they're coming out high within that. I want to look whether are those suppliers still with us. So sometimes we work on a contract basis, like 3 years. So I'm not going to work with those suppliers if we're in year 3. But have we got some long-term historic suppliers that actually
want to work
with?
Great.
Has there been any change in their scores? And then I've started to do some pilots around engaging with suppliers. So those ones where I spoke about before, where they are supply chain partners, some questions have gone on to Panacea, and we're asking those to respond to those. We're putting some questions into our new supplier form. So if we're onboarding a new supplier, they have to fill in certain information. So some questions are going in there. And then also obviously around the tender process. So we do have a scoring for environment, which is 10%, social value is 10% as well. Some questions are going in there. But it still means that there are some historical suppliers within that 96 that were identified where we're just not asking any questions of them because they're already with us. They're with us for a long time, so they're just not getting asked anything, and they're the ones that I'm going to be targeting with engagement with. And one of the key questions we're asking of them is, are you calculating your carbon footprint? If they are, can we take the amount of our spend with them and take that percentage of their carbon footprint to make it easier?
Very interesting. Fantastic. I'm well aware of time and we're marching towards the end, so there's lots of great discussion, and I'd love to go into more details about the sort of future plans and what you'd love to do next. But bearing in mind we've just got a few more minutes, I just thought I'd just wrap up the session. It's been really interesting hearing your own experiences. And what I'd love to do more of is we're planning to do another supply chain, specifically looking at supply chain workshop in the autumn. So we'll send out more details of that when they come up, when we've confirmed all the details of that. But anybody on the call wants to be involved with that, we'll go into much more detail on a lot of these topics, about the next steps, about how you can use the various tools that we've discovered and talked about in the presentations today, about that risk mapping, also looking at data quality and how you improve that over time. So we'll be running an event in the autumn along those lines. A couple of other bits of information from our side of things. Claire mentioned the Journey to Net Zero programme, and that's a 3-day level 3 IEMA accredited workshop, where it's literally, as the name suggests, it's understanding your impacts, how you can reduce those, planning, getting people involved, employee engagement, supply chain and strategic planning. The next one is in mid-July. We'll be sending out lots more details of these events and others, but do let us know if you wanted to attend that. It's really useful for people who are maybe in this, taking on this role, but haven't necessarily started on carbon. The other ones are the third event in our demystifying sessions of this financial year will be on finance. So green finance, helping to finance your green projects. Again, more details will come out in terms of the full information about what it is and when it is. We'll send out an email following this session. And then finally, very briefly, for those that are in Greater Manchester that are at SME, we have a grant fund available for investment in green projects. So we'll send more details out afterwards. Do let us know if you've got a project that has a carbon reduction element, energy efficiency, material reduction, those sorts of things. Maximum of £5,000, and it's match funded, so you pay up to a £10,000 project value. So those are sort of updates from my side of things, but it just leads me to, in the last minute, to thank you all very much for your involvement. We have a few comments in the chat, but I think they're being answered by various people. Tim's answering questions already. This is brilliant. What we'll do, obviously, you can link up on the likes of LinkedIn. If you want any introductions to anybody who's been on the call today, please do let us know. Otherwise, it just leaves me to thank our speakers very much for their time, taking their time out of their day to discuss their journey so far. As you can see, it's a long one. It's not necessarily an easy one, but we'll hopefully help you along the way. So yeah, just leave me to say thank you very much again for your attendance as well. Again, this is time out of your day. So hope you've got some useful information out of this workshop. And we'll hopefully see you on the next one on finance in about a month. So thank you very much.